Live, it says.
We're live. Hi, everyone. My name is Julia, and I am here talking to Johnny Hammer, who just returned from the Global Gap Year a couple weeks ago, actually. And so we're here to kind of describe and chat about what the Global Gap Year is and what TBB is, and a little bit more about his experience. So I'm going to start right off with just Johnny introducing yourself a little bit more.
Yeah, so hi, everyone. My name is Johnny Hammer. I just finished the TBB Global Gap Year North trip. I went to Ghana, Thailand, Cambodia, Ecuador, and Peru. I was born and raised in Tacoma, Washington, and I'm the youngest of 3 brothers, or 4 boys in total. Yeah, and I'm going to be going to Occidental next year in Los Angeles.
Awesome. So I'm going to jump right into question number 1, which is, why, out of going to college, out of doing a lot of other opportunities, why did you decide to take a gap year?
Yeah, there were multiple reasons why I wanted to take a gap year. My cousin had taken a gap year, and so that initially spurred the idea within me. I'm very much impassioned by language and culture, and initially I wanted to study Chinese. And I applied for a program which I unfortunately didn't get into, but it opened the door for TBB.
Fortunately.
Yeah. And another reason why I wanted to take a gap year, other than learning more about foreign culture and languages, was I was feeling pretty burnt out from high school. I went to a pretty rigorous college preparatory high school, and while I felt ready for college, I wasn't ready to commit myself to 4 or more years of college, and I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to study. I thought it'd just be a good chance for me to break away. And when I found TBB, I became extremely excited because they had this unique academic portion which a lot of other programs didn't have. And I also loved how much they valued helping students understand critical global issues and educating them on how they can work towards positive change. And also, it's their mission as students to learn. We're not here to go volunteer and change places. We're here to just learn as much as we can about a place.
Did you know all that going into TBB, or was that something that you found out along the way?
Right. I would say I got really, really lucky with my choice. I actually applied for TBB on the very last day. I could apply July 31st, which shows like how good of a staff TBB is for them being able to coordinate me in. But I think I learned about the difference between TBB and other gap year programs once I had started. I'd done research and seen how other programs focused on volunteering abroad, but TBB really focuses on, no, we're here to learn from the culture itself. Lots of programs may go in and volunteer, but they don't realize the cultural things that they're bringing with them that may actually cause harm to a society. So TBB is all about, we're here to learn from you, and we don't want to harm your culture. We just, like I said, we want to learn from it. Of course, we do help out when we can, but TBB is very conscious of that.
Awesome. So along with that, when you had decided to take a gap year, you mentioned that sort of a dissonance of coming to TBB and it being sort of a lucky place for you. Was there a different thing that you envisioned out of your gap year, and what was different about TBB? What did you get out of TBB?
Yeah, I think initially I intended to get a little bit more out of language. Unfortunately, I did get a lot out of language, but it's jumping from different countries to countries. So I didn't get in depth as I'd hoped to. However, I can speak Thai pretty darn well in a restaurant now, which is great. And I'm conversational in Spanish now, which is also great. But some of the biggest things that I got out of TBB really focuses on having students constantly challenge their assumptions and ask questions of themselves and of the greater society. And particularly, I traveled with a group of 11 other students and 3 program leaders. And as you're traveling together, you really have to be collaborative with one another. And one of the biggest things that I learned about myself is the judgments that I hold on others, and what my definition of success looks like. It's not the same as everyone else's. So it was really good for me to travel with this group and see what other people value and what other people live and how other people live, and learning to respect those. As a humbling process of who I am, and also just being a more open-minded person.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit more about your group members and what type of student finds TBB, and even your group leaders too?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. I love everybody in my group now, and that's because we're all so different from one another, yet we all have things that unite us together. I'll talk about 3 different people in my group who I all think are pretty different from myself, but it shows what kind of student can be attracted to TBB. I'll talk about myself first to give like some background on who I am a little bit more. I went to a pretty rigorous high school and was very academically focused and kind of on the track to go down international relations. So I imagine that TBB students would be like super studious and kind of a lot more similar to me. But I quickly found out that TBB attracts a whole range of people. My first roommate grew up in San Francisco and is very into music. He's not exactly sure where he wants to go to college yet, but he knows that he wants to pursue music production and philosophy. He's kind of a go-free spirit, and the academic portion wasn't really his ideal, but he did enjoy learning a lot about international development within our program. Another one of my students, gosh, I'm gonna be a PL one day. Another one of my peers is from Boston, and she was much more into the social scene in high school and was very into academics, but in a different way than I was. She was kind of into the curriculum, but in her own way, so she didn't always participate in the readings, but she was very much willing to engage with the culture. She always talked with her host families. She was willing to go on adventures all the time. Those 2 people, I would say in particular, were great examples of free-spirited people who signed up for TBB, which I think is a great quality to have. And even if you don't have that quality, initially, I think TBB is a great way to help you find that within yourself and kind of push you outside your comfort zone a little bit. The third person I'll talk about was born and raised in San Francisco as well. And he is very interested in environmental science and geology in particular. So doing this trip for him was a big way to see other areas of the world and look at their environment. He was a more introverted person and wasn't always willing to talk freely about his emotions, but our group found a way to coordinate with him and work together. That was another great thing about my group, is that each of us were distinctly different, but we came together as a group and really formed our own uniqueness, I would say.
I love that about the groups too, because I mean, on the one hand, you know you're going to be with this group for, up to 7 months. And then on the other hand, you've got such a diverse group that you kind of have to know how to make it work and how are you going to make this, these relationships last and be good for one another. And it's really interesting to learn a lot about yourself as well as you're going through.
Yeah, for sure.
And like you said about how TBB attracts a lot of different people, you mentioned something really good, that there are a lot of opportunities to meet learners where they're at. So if you are someone that wants to learn more about culture and to go out and engage with your host family on the weekends, versus sitting and reading about the seminars at every waking moment, there's something for everyone, and there's always an opportunity to learn. So I'm glad that your group members found that as well.
Yeah, definitely agree.
So something that you
else at all?
Oh yeah, go for it.
Okay. I will talk about my my mento, and we use the word mento because that promotes equality versus mentor. My mento was Peter, and he was born and raised in Houston, but I kind of lived on the West Coast for the past 10 years. I very, very, very much related to him. It was an awesome relationship. We both were extremely extroverted and in love with languages. And I think one of the best things about the relationship was it really was, he was helping me grow as a person, and I was helping him grow as a person. And just having that person who does have more knowledge and wisdom to me that I can come to, but I also relate to so much. I came to him in some of my hardest times on the trip, and a lot of the things that I was feeling vulnerable about with the group, he was there for me to talk with. So I really appreciated how he was my friend, but he was also a person who was looking out for me throughout this trip.
Did you know ahead of time when you were looking at gap years that the mentorship and the program leader would play such a big role in the program itself?
I don't think so, no. I'm kind of the person who always wants to get to know my teachers. And TBB offered a great setup for that. But I guess I didn't realize how big of a role these PLs would have in my life for the next 7 months. And each of them I felt I related to in a very unique way. And they address different areas of my life. Yeah.
That's wonderful. That's great to hear. So along the lines of mentorship and having people surrounded throughout the program, you talk a lot, and I've heard it from you, that the homestays were a pretty impactful part of the program for you. Do you want to talk about what the homestays meant, specifically where you went, and if you have some moments that are poignant and you want to point out?
Yeah, okay. I'll talk about my first homestay, which was in Ghana. We were staying in the eastern region of the country, right on the border with Togo, and we were staying in a town called Ho. I lived with 2 elderly people. They were both about 70 years old. I called them Mr. and Mrs. King, and they had one son who was about 35 and also lived at home. Typically, if you're not married, then you live at home in Ghanaian society. Man, this was one of like the richest experiences of the trip. I just am kind of lost for words when I think about them. My host father, Mr. King, was probably one of the wisest men I'd ever met. And I think what also really made me click with this host family is that I did share a language with them. So I was able to build much more deep relationships with them. But Mr. King and I would sit at our dinner table for sometimes hours on end and just talking. And he was a very wise man. So we talked a lot about philosophy. Religion is pretty important to Ghanaian society. And I felt that he was also willing to challenge his religion, which was a big part of my experience on TBB. So I loved kind of bouncing those ideas with him. On the other hand, my host mother, Mrs. King, I'd often try to help her cook or simply watch her cook. Food was a huge part of who she was as a human being because she worked in the school food systems for many years. And I would always say that she was so willing to look out for me and always put me first during my time there. So I was extremely appreciative of them welcoming me into their home. They taught me a lot about Ghanaian society. Every weekend I'd wash my clothes with my host brothers and they'd help me get all that supplies out, or I'd go to the market with them, or on Sundays, I go to church with them and kind of just experience that cultural aspect. Yeah, I miss them so much. That's all I gotta say. Yeah.
That sounds fabulous. Are you still able to talk to them or communicate in any way after your program?
Right. I do have their email addresses. And unfortunately, calling is a little bit difficult from here to Ghana, but I did manage to call my host father the second to last day of the program and speak with him. I hadn't spoken with him in about 5 months. So just hearing his voice again was great. Yeah, but I want to contact them this next weekend for Easter. So I'm going to try and give them a call again. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Do you have any particular advice or anything more about the homestays that you could say for applicants or students who are concerned about that or find it kind of scary that TBB does such an extensive homestay experience?
Right. Yeah, I can talk about that. I personally have done homestays before TBB, but I think I was the only one in my group who had ever done a homestay before. And with TBB in my group, we did 5 homestays, and all of them were such unique experiences. And I know for the people who had never done a homestay before, they just immediately fell in love with the experience. And that's because when you do a homestay, you have such a deeper look into the culture versus when you stay in a hotel. You get to know your neighbors on the block. You get to know your host family's best friends and their cousins and their sisters and brothers. The living circumstances with TBB are always comfortable. You may be pushed outside of your comfort zone from what you experience from wherever you're from. I imagine like it was a very different environment from where I've grown up in, but by no means did I ever feel that I was lacking the necessities that I needed. And I think that's honestly part of the experience of realizing that not everybody lives the way that I live, and that I'm extremely grateful for what I have here. And probably that I also don't need everything that I have currently in my house. So
yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. And I had mentioned to you this a little bit before the conversation, just how much you learn about yourself in terms of adaptability and how you can really get used to almost everything within a couple days even. It just becomes second nature.
Yeah. One of my homestay experiences in Thailand was my entire house was made out of bamboo. And you know, they didn't have much electricity, but you adapt to their environment. And by that point in the program, I definitely had formed a sense of adaptability. You're also living out of a backpack for 7 months, and you'll be amazed at how good you can get at packing, as well as just how little you actually need. Sometimes I felt that I had just too much stuff in my backpack, and I got rid of a couple things. But
that is true. Although I have never seemed to be great at packing quickly. I'm a great packer, but I am never good at, if you give me like a 15-minute thing, I'll freak out. But yes, you do get good at packing. Okay, so I have another question for you. Is there a moment or significant event or events, if you can't choose one, that you look back on as particularly shaping your TBB experience or the person that you are today?
Yeah. I'm going to go back to Ghana. I think I often look to Ghana when I look back on my experience with TBB, because this was the first country that I visited on the trip. It was my first time out of the Western world, we'll put it that way. And I think out of the countries that I visited, that was the culture that was most different from my own. But probably most importantly, and the thing that still sticks with me today and has really formed me, is the history of Ghana, particularly in relation to colonization. Where Ghana is located in West Africa was the hub of the transatlantic slave trade. So there are still currently about 35 standing slave forts, which are now often museums. And one particular instant, we visited a very famous slave fort called Cape Coast. And there was this image where I was looking at the fort, which was very architecturally beautiful. I was looking at the administrator's building where he lived, and it's this beautiful white building that looks out over the ocean, and you can feel the sea breeze blowing in. It's very peaceful, but literally directly below him were the slave dungeons, where thousands of people were kept in very starving conditions without, living in their feces, literally. And I felt that image of the administrator on top and the slaves below really symbolized the power dynamic that still exists in societies today, from whether that's gender, race, socioeconomic status, nationality, etc. So many of those structures are a result of the colonization period. And I think growing up in the United States, particularly where I lived, and the race, the gender, the socioeconomic status that I have, I kind of knew about these topics, but only cognitively. I knew about poverty in my own area, but I never had dove into it. It's just something that I accepted. But going abroad and seeing that, these things hit me emotionally and made me realize that I have so much privilege in a life that I've grown up with. So I think that now I'm really asking myself this question of what do I do with the power that my privilege gives me? And I definitely see the culture of where I live in a new light. And that can be challenging sometimes, but I think it's really important, especially at this age as I'm becoming an adult in a globalized world, and knowing my place within it and what is my responsibility to help others. Yeah, TBB makes you ask a lot of questions.
Big questions that you're grappling with, but that's really awesome.
Yeah.
Do you see yourself changing what you would have done, the trajectory of going off to college and becoming the Johnny prior to TBB versus this new, if it's new at all, but a different Johnny after TBB? And what sorts of things will you consider now or take advantage of on a college campus? Because you do have quite a lot of opportunities now, especially given your privilege.
Yeah. I think I'm definitely feeling a lot more passionate about going to college, because I realized that what the opportunity means to go to college, for one, it's a huge deal. A lot of people don't get to do this. Additionally, though, I would say that I do have a greater understanding of what I want to study. I'm still leaning down the path of international relations, but with a focus, a focus also within education. And that was largely inspired by TBB. So when I get to my college, Occidental in Los Angeles, I'm really looking forward to the diversity that they so heavily, what's the word that I'm looking for? They so heavily care about. Mm-hmm. And as I'm looking for internships and classes that I want to take, I want to look for internships and classes that are aligned with a lot of the new values that I hold from TBB. In general, I just feel that I have a greater conscience and more maturity in terms of how I can shape my own education. Yeah, that's how I'll put it.
That's great. And that's really what we're hoping that TBB provides to all students, to be able to go off and take advantage of all the opportunities now that you have in your career, in your college, in your life.
Yeah.
So I think you're off to a good start, and it's only April. Let's see. If you could go back to relive one moment or one memory even if it's just a place or a location, what would that be?
Oh man, that's a big question. Okay, I'll go with the first one that popped up in my mind, which was in Ecuador. It was with my family who lived in the Andes Mountains in a tiny little village or pueblo called Tocaso. And that day we went to go fishing for trout up in the mountains in a local river. And in Ecuador, people ride in the back of the truck if there is no room in the car. So I sat in the back of the truck on a mattress with my entire host family. And we just drove through the Andes Mountains for about 2 hours, and it was absolutely gorgeous. Looking through the farmland and seeing the Quechua influence, which is the culture of the Incas that still exists within the Andes Mountains today. And just kind of that blissful feeling in the connection that I had with my host family. We actually ended up not getting any trout because I don't know exactly what happened. I think it was because it was, what's that big carnival that they have?
Carnival?
Yeah, oh yeah, there it is. Carnival, it was Carnival weekend. So nobody was around, but just, I remember realizing how special that moment was. And there's a phrase in TBB, which is don't let the extraordinary just become ordinary. And I think that's an amazing phrase, because probably to these people, this was so ordinary to them. But to me, this was so absolutely extraordinary of what I was doing with this family and where I was at on the globe. And I live in a very mountainous area as well, and it really makes me appreciate where I live as well as to remember how extraordinary my little place in Tacoma is. Yeah.
That is a phrase, you're right, that is so TBB. And for good reason. There are so many days that you wake up and you forget that you're on a beach or in the mountains or with this wonderful new culture or family, and it just becomes so routine that you're living there, and that's great because you're ingrained and really experiencing the culture. But to remember that this isn't your everyday, that you'll go back, that, yeah, while it is some people's everyday, it is pretty extraordinary.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess I'm going to open the floor to you if there's anything that comes to mind that you wanted to talk about, a couple of questions that are lingering or advice that you have for people considering a gap year.
Man, so much power all of a sudden.
What are you going to do with all your power?
I know. I was kind of waiting for this question, so I think I'll start with this. What things would I have done differently in my gap year? One thing that I think I would have been more conscious of was staying in the moment on the trip. And I think in general, I did pretty well at this, but I definitely started thinking about, in about December, oh, what am I going to be doing this summer? Or like, oh, I need to start applying for jobs, or like, oh, I need to apply for a financial aid for college, etc. And while maybe the answer is not to ignore those things completely, because your conscious is obviously bringing them up for some reason, staying in the moment as much as possible is extremely valuable. There were a couple instances which I wish I could have taken back to kind of redo and be in the moment more. So when else are you going to like have a trip like this where you're experiencing a culture so in depth?
Many cultures too.
Right, many cultures, yeah. I definitely encourage you, even if you're not a language person, to learn the language as much as possible wherever you are, because the language gives you a more in-depth understanding of the culture, and also will help you connect with the people more. You'll also be amazed at how many forms of communication you can practice without simply being dependent upon language. At the end of every country, we have to do a media project, and it's essentially you get to research any topic that you want. And so when I was in Thailand, I did my entire media project on communication because my host family didn't speak English and I didn't yet speak Thai. But of course, just like talking with them all the time, I picked up Thai, and we were able to communicate through food, through games, simply through farming. It's amazing how many ways human beings can connect without, sharing a culture or a language. Questions that I still have. Oh, actually, I'm going to go with one more piece of advice.
Awesome.
I visited my friends at college this last weekend, and I was talking with one of my best friends who, she and I are very similar. And currently she's going down the path of majoring in pre-dental as well as business. And she's getting kind of very set in her ways of what she wants to study and what her future is going to look like. And I tried to erase her awareness of like, you're still 19 years old. You have a whole life in front of you if you're going to be making all these new discoveries. And I don't know if I would have said that before TBB, because our culture in the United States or Western Europe, or probably wherever you're from and you're looking for this program, our culture tells us so much that we need to know what we want to do at this age in our lives. But the reality is that we still have so much growing to do. And I really think that TBB has given me the wisdom to go into college and be aware of how much I'm going to be changing throughout my life. And while I do have some sort of path that I want to go down, I should still be open to the new experiences that will definitely come my way. Yeah.
That is great advice, even for someone my age and my parents and everyone. everyone. Yeah, that's great that you're seeing life that way.
Yeah.
More people should.
Yeah. Questions. What is development?
Oh gosh,
Yeah.
always evolving.
Right. That's the central question of TBB. What is development? I would say that I do have some sort of understanding of it, but it's a big question. Yeah. I'm sure
Yes.
you'll be in this situation soon, future TBB student.
To those of you watching. Okay, I'm going to leave it with one last question of, let's see. Who are your heroes and how will they continue to influence the person that you are and will become?
Okay. I will start with one of my program leaders, Patrick McMurdo. He was just, I really admired his, how conscious he was of himself and the powers that he held as a human being. Like I talked about earlier, I've become a lot more conscious of my privilege, particularly as a white American male. And he also identified as those as well. And he has continuously worked on trying to address these things and practice humility. And that can be pretty difficult for a lot of men in our culture because these topics are kind of taboo to talk about, especially as men. But I just really admire how much he's taken these to heart. And I see him as a role model for other men of what they can do to be more aware of these ideas. Additionally, he's also extremely aware when he goes into another culture and trying to respect that culture. I would also say that while he does have a direction of what he wants to pursue in his life, he is very flexible and open to changes and kind of just lets his life path take him wherever it wants to go. So the word that I would describe him as is Jayan Yen, which literally means cool heart in Thai, but it's like calm all the time.
I like that.
Yeah. He's just a very wise man, and I'm so grateful that I got to spend 7 months with him. Another one of my mentors or heroes, I would say, is Nelson Mandela. I'll choose a bigger one. Or bigger, what does that mean? I'll choose a more well-known one. I read his biography while I was on TBB, and learning about the life that he grew up in and what he was able to overcome and transform within South African society was pretty remarkable. I admire the confidence that he had in himself and the belief that he had in himself to make change. And speaking of TBB's mission to help students know how to make positive change, Nelson Mandela is a great example of somebody that I learned about on this trip.
He is.
Yeah. I think I also admire how he was able to create change within South African society, but also maintain his humility and not just flip the power system. Of course, there's still work that needs to go on in South Africa, as everywhere. But yeah, I definitely admire him. Yeah.
Awesome. These are great heroes, and Patrick should watch this. That was very nice of you. Yeah, I think we're closing up on time. Is there any last thought that you want to get in before we stop the broadcast?
Right. I obviously definitely recommend Thinking Beyond Borders.
We didn't pay you.
They didn't pay me, I promise. This is all. But even if you find out that maybe this program isn't the one for you, I still highly recommend that you take a gap year. You'll know a lot more about yourself. You'll probably be a lot more conscious about the world wherever you are. And you'll have a great time. So take a gap year. Yeah.
Great advice. I'm on board with that as well.
Yeah.
Cool.
Sweet.
Well, thank you so much, Johnny.
Yeah. Thank you, Julia. Cool. Thanks,
I'm
guys.
going to stop the live broadcast now.